Now to Durban, South Africa, where representatives from nearly 200 countries have gathered to negotiate strategies for dealing with climate change, including how to extend the soon-to-expire Kyoto Protocol. Efforts to negotiate a successor to the Kyoto Pact to reduce greenhouse gases have been on hold since the failure of the climate conference in Copenhagen 2 years ago. Previous debates have focused on how to balance the responsibilities of industrialized nations with those of emerging countries, but few believe this conference will result in a new agreement. Now, joining us via phone for more about the opening of this very important climate change conference is VOA correspondent Gabe Joselow. Gabe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, hi Ndimyake.
Hi, so obviously this is first day of the conference. It's going to be 2 weeks ongoing, but just tell us what happened today. What kind of discussions took place?
Sure. Well, this was the official start of the conference, and it was, since it's being hosted by South Africa, the opening ceremony was sort of presided over by South African President Jacob Zuma, who made it clear that this was really going to be an African conference where the needs of African nations, which are for the most part, developing nations, will really be addressed. And that's what he was saying, is that while bickering goes on between industrialized nations about who's going to pay for emissions costs, the real brunt of the damage caused by climate change is being paid for by African nations. So that is something that a lot of people on the ground here are saying, is that this will be a year where developing nations will hopefully have a greater voice.
And of course, just adding a little bit to what President Zuma said, he said this is a life and death matter that really should be taken more seriously. We just, in the intro, said how it's very unlikely that a new agreement will come out of this conference. What sense are you getting about that?
Yeah, that's true. There are very few supporters of a new Kyoto Protocol, which is a legally binding agreement. The European Union is one of the only ones, and then there's a lot of developing nations as well. The thing is, the United States is one of the major opponents, actually, to anything that's legally binding, at least now. They're looking ahead to the year 2020, and until then, they're proposing a lot of voluntary cuts, agreements that were made in Cancun at the climate conference last year, and also the establishment of a $100 billion a year fund that will be dished out to developing nations to help them either adapt to the damages caused by climate change or to develop the new technologies they need to cope.
Now, it seems there are
other strategies.
Yes, obviously. Now, I know a lot of delegates, Africans and also China, have been coming down on a lot of Western countries who they say are responsible for polluting the atmosphere, and that they should fund some of these programs that you just mentioned that should now help to reduce the gas emissions. What kind of reaction have you at least come across so far on that?
Right. Well, right, that's true. I mean, a lot of the anger and a lot of the demands are focused at places like the United States, which is probably the second biggest polluter in the country, in the world, I'm sorry. And developing nations are saying that, that these big polluters are the ones that should really be making the cuts. The United States' response to all of this is that, well, they're not going to agree to anything unless it involves everybody. So they're saying emerging economies now create almost as much pollution, or certainly more pollution in the last 10 years than they did 10 years ago when Kyoto was first signed. So the United States' argument is that they should also be, privy to these legally binding agreements if there happens to be one.
Well, I know that discussion will definitely dominate during the 2 weeks that this conference is going to take place. But just coming down back to Africa, which, as we've stated, bears the brunt of a lot of the impact of the gas emissions around the world. President Zuma did say that Africa is committed to reducing gas emissions 34% by 2020 and then 42% by 2025. Can you just give us a little background in terms of the reaction to that, and also how maybe they came across those kind of figures?
South Africa has announced some pretty ambitious cuts there. It's not clear exactly how they're going to accomplish a lot of these emissions cuts, but one of the things that Africa has that a lot of other parts of the world don't are very natural forests. And so one of the major initiatives that the UN has been a proponent of is to pay African nations to just maintain their natural forests that are existing now as carbon sinks, as areas that will produce oxygen and take in carbon dioxide. And so that's one way that a lot of African nations can achieve really ambitious cuts, is actually by leaving things alone. At the same time, there's a lot of development of clean energy technology across the continent, Kenya is known for is powered almost 50% by geothermal power. There's great wind potential. The Congo River has amazing potential for hydropower. And so I think that's the way the continent will go about achieving a lot of these very ambitious cuts.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Gabe. Just briefly, any heads up for what is or can be expected for tomorrow?
Well, there's some more talks going on in the back rooms tomorrow between nations. As things get going right now, it's really about presenting policies, initial policies. So a lot of NGOs will be making their case for how they want cuts to be achieved and that kind of thing. So there won't be any agreements in the first week, but there will be a lot of people laying out what their arguments are going to be, and then in the next week we'll start to see the results of some of these negotiations.
Okay, well, Gabe, we'll be talking to you a lot over the 2 weeks, but thank you so much for really just kind of concising what is happening there. That's VOA correspondent Gabe Joselow, who's covering the climate change conference this week in Durban, South Africa.